They thought she was invisible, until the room learned what silence really meant. The chandelier light spilled across polished marble floors, glimmering against crystal glasses and designer heels, but none of it belonged to Lena Brooks, who moved quietly between tables with a rag in her hand, her dark skin catching the golden glow only when someone noticed her. And tonight, they did, not with kindness, but with laughter, sharp and careless, the kind that cuts deeper because it pretends to be harmless. "Hey, you missed a spot," a woman's voice rang out, dripping with amusement, as she tilted her glass and let a stream of red wine spill deliberately onto the floor, the liquid spreading like a stain that demanded attention, all eyes turning, all phones subtly lifting. Lena paused for half a second, just half, before lowering herself to her knees, cloth in hand, because hesitation had a cost she couldn't afford. "Come on, at least smile," another voice added, a man this time. Leaning back in his chair like this was entertainment he'd paid for. Laughter followed, soft at first, then louder, encouraged, growing bold in the safety of numbers. Lena kept her head down, her fingers tightening slightly around the cloth as she wiped the wine in slow, steady motions, as if control over something this small was all she had left. Her reflection shimmered faintly in the marble beneath her, distorted, reduced, almost erased. "Wait," the woman said again, a grin curling her lips. "Didn't they say you sing?" A ripple moved through the room, curiosity mixing with cruelty. "Yeah, sing something while you're down there," someone else chimed in, and just like that, it became a game, a performance she never agreed to. Lena's chest rose slowly, a breath held too long, then released, because survival sometimes meant choosing silence over pride and dignity over reaction. Her voice, when it came, was soft, barely above the hum of the room, fragile but steady, a melody that didn't belong in a place like this. Something older, something real. It didn't stop the laughter at first, but it shifted it, softened it, confused it, because there was something in that voice they couldn't quite mock. Not completely, not without feeling something uncomfortable press against their polished identities. And then, just as suddenly as the music had filled the air, it stopped, not from her, but from the speakers above, the entire room falling into an unnatural stillness, like someone had pulled the sound out from under them. Heels froze mid-step, glasses hovered mid-air, and from the far end of the room, where shadows met gold light, a man stepped forward, tall, composed, his presence quiet but heavy, like winter settling in without warning. Adrian Volkov didn't raise his voice, didn't need to. His eyes moved once across the room, then landed on Lena, still kneeling, still holding the cloth. And then he spoke, calm, precise. "Who told her to kneel?" And just like that, the laughter disappeared, swallowed whole, as if it had never existed at all. No one moved. Not the woman in heels, not the man holding his glass midair, not even the servers who had learned long ago that silence was safer than curiosity, because when Adrian Volkov asked a question, it was never just a question. It was a line drawn in the air that no one wanted to cross. His gaze did not rush. It moved slowly, deliberately, from face to face, reading the room the way other men read contracts, measuring reactions, weighing silence. Lena remained on her knees, her fingers still resting on the damp cloth, unsure if she was supposed to stop or disappear or continue pretending none of this was happening. Her heart pounded so loudly she was certain someone could hear it, but no one looked at her now, not the way they had before. Something had shifted, subtle but undeniable, like the air itself had thickened. The woman who had spilled the wine let out a small, nervous laugh, the kind that tried to dismiss what could not be dismissed. "It was just a joke," she said, waving her hand as if that could erase the moment, as if cruelty could be softened by tone. Adrian's eyes settled on her, not raised, not sharp, just steady, and somehow that was worse. "A joke," he repeated quietly, as if testing the word, as if deciding whether it deserved to exist in the same space as what had just happened. The woman straightened slightly, her confidence flickering but not gone. People like her were not used to being questioned, especially not in rooms where they believed they belonged. "Yes, we were just having a little fun," she added, glancing around for support. But the room offered none. Eyes dropped, shoulders stiffened. No one wanted to be seen standing on the wrong side of whatever this was becoming. Adrian took another step forward, his shoes making no sound against the marble, yet every movement felt amplified, intentional. Fun, he said again, softer this time. And then his gaze shifted, not to the crowd, not to the woman, but back to Lena, still on the floor, still holding the cloth like it was the only thing anchoring her in place. Stand up, he said. And for a moment, she did not move, not because she did not hear him, but because she was not used to being addressed like that, not in a room like this, not by someone like him. I said stand up. His voice did not rise, but it carried, clear and undeniable. Lena slowly pushed herself to her feet, her knees unsteady, her hands instinctively smoothing the front of her uniform as if she could erase the evidence of the last few minutes. Her eyes remained lowered, not out of submission, but out of habit, because looking up had never served her well in places like this. Adrian watched her for a second longer than expected, not assessing, not judging, just observing. And then he turned back to the woman. If she is part of your entertainment, he said calmly, then you have misunderstood what kind of house you are standing in. The words were not loud, but they landed heavier than anything shouted could have. The woman's smile faltered completely now, replaced by something uncertain, something closer to realization. And in that moment, the entire room seemed to understand that whatever came next would not be dismissed as easily as a joke. The silence did not break. It deepened, stretching across the room like something alive, pressing against every person standing there, waiting. The woman's confidence cracked just enough to show what lay beneath it. Not guilt, not yet, but discomfort, the kind that comes when power begins to slip in a place where it was always assumed. I think you are overreacting, she said finally, her voice tighter now, less certain, but still holding onto the last threads of control she believed she had. She works here, does she not? This is part of her job. A few people shifted slightly at those words, not agreeing, not disagreeing, simply trying to stay invisible in a moment that no longer allowed it. Adrian did not respond immediately, and that pause carried more weight than any interruption could have. He looked at Lena again, really looked this time, taking in the way her shoulders were slightly drawn inward, the way her hands hovered near her sides as if unsure where they were allowed to exist, the faint tremble she tried to hide. And then he asked, not loudly, not harshly, but clearly enough that every person in the room heard it. Is this part of your job? The question landed differently, not directed at the woman, but at Lena, and for a second, she froze, her mind searching for the safest answer, the answer that would not cost her everything. Because in her world, truth was rarely rewarded, and silence had always been protection. I clean, sir, she said quietly, her voice steady despite everything. I do not perform. The words were simple, but they shifted something fundamental, because for the first time that night, her voice was not shaped by apology, it was shaped by truth. Adrian nodded once, almost imperceptibly, as if confirming something he already knew, and then he turned back to the woman. You heard her, he said, calm, controlled, leaving no room for interpretation. The woman opened her mouth as if to respond, then stopped, because there was nothing she could say that would restore what had already been taken from her. The illusion of untouchable authority. The room seemed to lean in, every breath measured, every movement calculated, waiting for what would come next. Adrian took one step closer to her, not threatening, not aggressive, but undeniable, his presence alone forcing attention, forcing acknowledgement. If you require someone to kneel for your comfort, he continued, his voice even, almost conversational, then you misunderstand both comfort and respect. The words did not rise, but they cut cleanly through the space, leaving no space for laughter, no space for dismissal, only understanding, slow and unavoidable. The woman's hands tightened slightly at her sides, her composure slipping in small, visible ways now, her eyes flickering briefly toward the people around her, searching for support that no longer existed. And in that moment, the power dynamic that had once been so clear began to invert, not loudly, not dramatically, but with a quiet certainty that made it impossible to ignore. And Lena stood there, no longer invisible, not yet safe, but seen in a way she had not expected, as if the room itself had been forced to recognize what it had tried so hard to overlook. The room did not breathe. It waited, suspended between what had happened and what was about to happen, and in that fragile space, Adrian Volkov made his decision without raising his voice, without changing his expression. "Then we will correct the misunderstanding," he said quietly, and the simplicity of his tone made the words land harder than anything dramatic ever could. The woman blinked, clearly unprepared for what that meant. "I do not think that is necessary," she replied quickly, trying to regain control, but her voice no longer carried the same certainty. It wavered at the edges, revealing the shift she could no longer deny. Adrian did not argue, did not debate. He simply stepped aside slightly, creating space in the center of the room, an open space that suddenly felt like a stage no one wanted to stand on. "You asked her to kneel," he said, his gaze steady on the woman. "So now you will do the same, and you will apologize." The words settled into the silence like a verdict, final and unmovable. A ripple moved through the crowd, subtle but unmistakable, discomfort, disbelief. A quiet recognition that the rules had changed in a way no one had anticipated. The woman's face flushed, not with anger, but with something closer to exposure, as if the carefully constructed image she had carried into this room was beginning to fracture under the weight of expectation. "This is ridiculous," she said, a last attempt to resist. But even she could hear how small it sounded now, how out of place it felt in a room that had already turned against her. Adrian's expression did not shift, not even slightly. "Respect is not optional here," he replied, and there was something in the way he said it that made it clear this was not about her, not about the moment, but about something deeper, something that defined the very space they were standing in. The woman hesitated, her eyes darting once more across the room, searching for an ally, a distraction, an escape, but found none. The same people who had laughed moments ago now looked away, unwilling to be associated with what this had become, and slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, she moved, her heels clicking softly against the marble as she stepped into the open space. Every movement measured, every second stretching longer than it should, until finally, she lowered herself down, not gracefully, not confidently, but carefully, as if the act itself carried a weight she had never imagined she would bear. The room watched, not with amusement, but with a silence so complete it felt almost reverent. And then, after a pause that seemed to hold the entire room in place, she spoke. Her voice no longer sharp, no longer amused, but quiet, stripped of pretense. "I am sorry," she said, the words directed at Lena, who stood a few feet away, still processing what was unfolding. Still unsure if this was real or something that would disappear the moment she blinked. Adrian did not look at the woman again, his attention shifting back to Lena, as if the apology was not the end of the moment, but only the beginning of something neither of them fully understood yet. And for the first time that night, Lena lifted her eyes, not fully, not boldly, but enough to meet his gaze for a brief second, and in that fleeting connection, something unspoken passed between them. Something that had nothing to do with power and everything to do with being. Seen the apology did not echo. It settled, quiet and heavy, like something the room did not know how to carry. Lena stood still, her hands no longer trembling but not yet steady, as if her body had not caught up to what had just happened, because apologies like that did not exist in her world, not from people like her, not in places like this. And for a moment, she did not know what to do with it. Adrian watched her, not with expectation, not with pressure, but with a patience that felt unfamiliar, almost disarming. "You can speak," he said, his voice softer now, no longer cutting through the room but resting within it, giving her space instead of taking it. Lena swallowed, her throat dry, her voice unsure where to begin, because every instinct told her to minimize, to accept, to move on, to not make this bigger than it needed to be. But something in the stillness around her, something in the way every eye was now on her not as an object, but as a presence, made her hesitate, and then choose differently. "I did not come here to be part of anyone's joke," she said quietly, each word measured, careful, but clear. The room shifted again, not in discomfort this time, but in recognition, because dignity, when spoken without anger, carried a different kind of weight. Adrian nodded once, as if acknowledging not just her words, but the strength it took to say them. And then he turned slightly, addressing the room without raising his voice. Let this be understood, he said. No one in this house is invisible. The sentence landed like a boundary, firm and absolute. And for the first time that evening, the space felt different. Not just quieter, but changed, as if something fundamental had been corrected. The woman who had apologized remained where she was for a second longer before slowly rising, her movements careful now, stripped of the confidence she had carried earlier. She did not speak again, did not attempt to reclaim anything, because there was nothing left to reclaim. The moment had already passed her by. Adrian stepped back, not reclaiming the center, not drawing attention, simply allowing the room to settle around what had just happened. Conversations did not resume immediately. Laughter did not return. Instead, there was a pause, long and thoughtful, as if everyone present was recalibrating their understanding of what had just unfolded. Lena felt it, the shift, not just in the room, but in herself, the way her shoulders straightened slightly without her realizing, the way her breathing steadied, not because the situation was over, but because something inside her had been acknowledged, validated in a way she had never expected. She glanced down at the cloth still in her hand. The same cloth that had moments ago felt like a symbol of humiliation, and now felt like nothing more than what it was. A tool, not a definition. Adrian's voice reached her again. Quieter this time, meant only for her. You are not required to stay, he said, offering not an order, but a choice. And that, more than anything else, made her pause, because choice had always been the one thing she had the least of. Lena looked up, just slightly, meeting his eyes again for a brief moment, and in that second, she realized that whatever happened next would not be decided for her, and that realization, quiet and powerful, settled deeper than any apology ever could. The room did not return to what it had been. It could not. Something too quiet and too precise had shifted the balance, and even as soft conversations began to rise again, they carried a different tone now, measured, careful, aware. Lena remained where she stood, the cloth still in her hand, her mind catching up to the reality that had unfolded in front of her, because moments like this did not happen to her, not in places like this, not with men like him. She glanced toward the exit, instinct pulling her in that direction, the familiar urge to disappear before anything else could change, before the world corrected itself and reminded her where she belonged. But Adrian's presence remained, not blocking her path, not demanding anything, simply there, steady and unyielding in a way that did not feel like control, but like certainty. What is your name? He asked, his voice low enough that it did not carry across the room, yet clear enough that it reached her without effort. Lena hesitated for a fraction of a second, not because she did not know the answer, but because she was not used to being asked. Not like this, not without dismissal already attached to it. Lena, she said, her voice quiet but firm. Lena Brooks. Adrian nodded slightly, as if committing it to memory, not as a formality, but as something that mattered. Lena Brooks, he repeated, the name sounding different when spoken by someone who chose to say it, rather than someone who ignored it. He glanced briefly around the room, ensuring the shift remained intact, then returned his attention to her. How long have you worked here? He asked. Lena adjusted her grip on the cloth unconsciously, grounding herself in something familiar. 3 weeks, she answered. Evenings mostly. Adrian considered that, his expression unreadable but not distant, as if he was placing pieces together that no one else had bothered to see. And before that, he continued, not pressing, simply asking. Lena hesitated again, the question reaching into a part of her life she kept carefully separate from places like this. I worked at a diner, she said. Double shifts, 6 days a week. She did not add more, did not explain the early mornings, the late nights, the quiet exhaustion that followed her everywhere, because those details were not things people in rooms like this usually cared to hear. But Adrian did not interrupt, did not move on. He waited, and in that pause, something unexpected happened. Lena continued. I was studying music before that, she said, almost as if the words had been pulled out of her without permission. Piano, mostly. But I had to stop. Her voice did not break, but it softened, carrying a weight that had nothing to do with the room and everything to do with the path she had not been able to take. Adrian's gaze shifted slightly, not in surprise, but in recognition, as if something she had said connected to something he understood. "What made you stop?" he asked. And this time the question was quieter, more careful. Lena looked down briefly, not out of avoidance, but to gather herself. "Life," she answered simply, because sometimes the truth did not need details to be understood. Adrian nodded once more, accepting the answer without pushing further, respecting the boundary without needing to define it. And for a moment, neither of them spoke, the noise of the room continuing around them but no longer touching the space they occupied. And in that silence, something new began to form, not dramatic, not obvious, but steady, like the beginning of a shift that neither of them had planned, yet neither could ignore. The music eventually returned, soft and carefully chosen. As if even the playlist understood that something had changed, conversations resumed in low tones, measured and cautious. But the energy of the room no longer belonged to laughter or spectacle, it belonged to awareness. And Lena could feel it in the way people no longer looked through her, but around her, uncertain, restrained, as if unsure what version of her they were allowed to acknowledge now. She shifted her weight slightly, still holding the cloth, still standing in a place she had never been meant to stand in for this long. And for a moment, she considered stepping away, returning to the edges where she had always been safe, where expectations were clear and boundaries were invisible but understood. But Adrian remained where he was, not blocking her path, not guiding it either, simply present in a way that made leaving feel less like an escape and more like a choice she had to make consciously. "You said you studied music," he said after a moment, his voice quiet, unaffected by the noise returning around them. Lena nodded slightly, unsure where the conversation was leading, unsure if it was even meant to lead anywhere at all. "Yes," she answered. "For 2 years." Adrian glanced toward the grand piano that sat near the far end of the room, polished black, untouched for most of the evening, more decoration than instrument in a space designed to impress rather than to feel. "Can you still play?" he asked, and the question caught her off guard in a way the earlier ones had not, because this was not about survival, not about work, not about staying in line. This reached into something she had set aside, something she had convinced herself no longer belonged to her. Lena hesitated, her eyes following his for a brief moment before returning to the floor. "I have not played in a long time," she said carefully, the truth wrapped in distance. Adrian did not nod this time, did not accept the answer as an ending. Instead, he took a step in the direction of the piano, then paused, looking back at her, not with expectation, but with invitation. "That is not what I asked," he said calmly, and there was no pressure in his tone, only clarity. Lena felt something shift again, not in the room, but within herself, a quiet resistance meeting a quiet possibility. She could refuse, she could step back, return to what she knew. No one would question it now, not after what had already happened. But something about the way he had said her name earlier, the way he had spoken to her as if she existed beyond the role she had been placed in, made that option feel different, less safe, less certain. Her grip on the cloth loosened slightly, and for the first time since she had entered the room that evening, she let it fall to her side, not discarded, not forgotten, just no longer needed in that moment. "Yes," she said finally, her voice quiet but steady. "I can still play." Adrian did not smile, did not react in any visible way, but there was a subtle shift in his posture, something that suggested acknowledgement, and without another word, he turned and walked toward the piano, not commanding, not leading, simply moving, leaving the space open for her to follow or not. The room noticed. Of course it did. Conversation slowed again, eyes drawn once more to the center of something they did not fully understand. And Lena stood there for a second longer, her heart steadying in a rhythm she had not felt in years, before she took a step forward, not as someone being watched, but as someone choosing to be seen. And that step, small and deliberate, carried more weight than anything that had happened before it. The room did not return to noise. It leaned into silence again. But this time it was different, not tense, not uncomfortable, but expectant, as Lena walked toward the piano, each step steady but unfamiliar, as if she were crossing into a version of herself she had not been allowed to be for a long time. The polished surface of the instrument reflected the chandelier above, gold light stretching across black lacquer, untouched, waiting, Adrian stopped a few feet away, not sitting, not hovering, simply giving her the space to approach it on her own terms. Lena paused beside the bench, her fingers hovering just above the keys, not touching yet, as if contact would make it real in a way she was not prepared for. The room watched, but not with the same hunger as before. There were no phones raised now, no laughter waiting to break the moment, only stillness, the kind that listens before it understands. Lena lowered herself onto the bench slowly, her posture instinctively straightening, something ingrained returning without effort. Her hands rested in her lap for a second, then lifted, hovering again, her reflection faint in the glossy surface, and for a brief moment, doubt returned, sharp and quiet. What if she had forgotten? What if this part of her no longer existed the way she remembered? What if the silence behind her turned back into something else the moment she failed? Adrian's voice did not interrupt, but it reached her anyway, calm. Steady. Take your time, he said, and there was no urgency in it. No expectation of performance, only permission, and that changed everything. Lena exhaled slowly, the tension in her shoulders easing just enough, her fingers lowering to the keys, not pressing yet, just feeling, reacquainting, like touching something that had once been part of her body, something she had known without thinking. The first note came softly, almost hesitant, a single tone that seemed to test the room before committing to it, and then another, and another, forming a melody that grew not from confidence, but from memory, something deeper than practice, deeper than fear. The room did not move. Glasses remained untouched. Conversations paused mid-thought, because what filled the space now was not entertainment. It was something quieter, something honest. The melody unfolded slowly, steadying as it went, her fingers remembering what her mind had doubted, the rhythm returning, the hesitation fading, until the music no longer belonged to the moment, but to her, fully, completely. Adrian remained where he was, his expression unchanged, but his attention unwavering, not analyzing, not judging, simply listening, and in that listening, something unspoken passed again, the same quiet recognition that had begun earlier, only now it carried weight, the kind that settled deeper with every note. Lena's eyes did not lift from the keys, but her presence changed, the hesitation replaced by something steadier, something that had always been hers but had been buried beneath necessity, beneath survival, beneath the need to disappear. And as the final notes softened into silence, the room did not react immediately, no applause, no sudden movement, just a stillness that held the last sound in place. Unwilling to let it go too quickly, Lena's hands remained on the keys for a second longer, then lifted slowly, her breath steady, her posture unchanged, and for the first time that night, the silence around her did not feel like something she had to endure. It felt like something she had created. The silence did not break. It settled into something deeper, something that no longer needed noise to prove it existed. Lena remained seated at the piano for a moment longer, her hands resting lightly above the keys, as if the music had not fully left her yet, as if letting go too quickly would erase what had just been reclaimed. And then, slowly, she stood, not rushed, not uncertain, but steady, her movements carrying a quiet confidence that had not been there before. The room watched her differently now, not as someone passing through their world, but as someone who had altered it without asking permission. Adrian stepped closer, not into her space, but near enough that his presence could be felt without overwhelming it. "You did not forget," he said, his voice low, almost reflective, as if he was stating something he had already known. Lena shook her head slightly, not in denial, but in realization. "I thought I did," she admitted, her voice calm, no longer shaped by apology or hesitation. Adrian studied her for a brief moment, then nodded, as if acknowledging not just her words, but the journey behind them, around them. The room began to breathe again, but it was different now, softer, more aware. Conversations resumed carefully, but no one returned to who they had been before, because something had been witnessed that could not be unseen. The woman who had once stood at the center of attention had moved to the edge of the room, quiet, composed, but changed, her earlier confidence replaced by something more measured, more thoughtful, and she did not look at Lena again, not out of dismissal, but out of recognition. Adrian turned slightly, his attention shifting back to Lena. "If you choose to stay," he said, not commanding, not expecting. "It will not be as someone who disappears." The words were simple, but they carried weight, the kind that offered more than a position, more than a role. They offered acknowledgement. Lena held his gaze for a second longer this time, not out of defiance, not out of boldness, but because she no longer felt the need to look away. "I think," she said slowly, choosing each word with care, "I have spent enough time disappearing." Adrian did not smile, but something in his expression softened, almost imperceptibly, as if her answer aligned with something he respected. He stepped back then, not claiming the moment, not closing it, simply allowing it to exist without his presence defining it. And Lena stood there, no longer holding the cloth, no longer bound to the space she had occupied earlier. The chandelier light still reflected off the marble, the same room, the same people, but nothing about it felt the same, because dignity had entered quietly, without announcement, without permission, and had changed everything it touched. And that night, no one remembered the laughter, no one remembered the wine on the floor. They remembered the silence, the music, and the moment a woman who had been treated as invisible stood in the center of a room and reminded everyone what it meant to be seen. And that day, the world remembered what dignity looks like.